Let's do some speaking practice. I'm Melinda, and this is the second in a series of videos giving you practice with the first part of the IELTS test. I'm going to ask you some questions. You need to listen and answer. The first few questions, the warmer questions, are always the same. When we get to groups 1 and 2, listen to the questions and then pause the video while you say your answer aloud. Do this for each question. You should also record your answer to listen back later. A smartphone makes a good recording device. Ready? Could you show me your identification, please? Thank you. Could you tell me your full name? And what should I call you? Thank you. Do you work or study? Let's talk about accommodation. Tell me the kind of accommodation you live in. How long have you lived there? What do you like about living there? What sort of accommodation would you most like to live in? Let's talk about future plans. Why are you taking the IELTS test? What are you planning to do in the next 5 years? What are you planning to do in the next 10 years? What is the first thing you'll do when you get home today? Okay, so let's look at the questions that you heard. So the first 4, always the same. The first 3, you can give a very short answer. The 4th question will be about work or study, and you should give the examiner a little bit more information. Where do you work? How long have you worked there? Or where do you study? What are you studying? So just a few pieces of information to expand a little bit. The group 1 questions you heard. So tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in. So is it big? Is it small? Is it close to the city? Is it in the countryside? Is it an apartment? Is it a house? Is it old? Is it new? You can choose any of these things to talk about. For most of these questions, there is no correct answer. So your answer needs to be relevant to the question, but you have a fair bit of scope. There are a number of things you could talk about. The second question, how long have you lived there? Well, the short answer would be something like 2 years. A longer answer would be that you've been there for 2 years, but prior to that you lived, and you can talk about where you lived in the past, for example. Or you could talk about how long your family has lived there and who your neighbours are. A number of different things. Question 3, what do you like about living there? So you need to think about the positive things, and it's also okay to talk about the things that you don't like so much about living there. And the 4th question asks about the accommodation you would most like to live in. Notice the word would in the question. When you hear the word would, usually the answer will also require the word would. So I'd like to live in an apartment in the inner city. I'd like to live in a house by the beach. So I'd, meaning I would. So it's a hypothetical question. Your answer will probably use the word would. Notice question 2, how long have you lived there? Have is from the past until now. So it's a particular tense. Your answer will be, I have lived there for 3 years. I have lived there for 5 years. In group 2, the first question, why are you taking the IELTS test? So your answer, I am taking it because. Number 2, what are you planning to do in the next 5 years? It's asking you about the future. So your answer will be about the future. I am planning to, or you might say, I hope to. What are you planning to do in the next 10 years? A very similar kind of question grammatically. So I plan to, or I am planning to, I hope to. And the last question, what's the first thing you'll do when you get home today? So your answer here again, it's about the future. I am going to, I plan to, I will probably. So a range of ways you can answer these questions. So as you're listening to the questions, you need to be aware of the tense and what kind of information they're asking about. Is it about the past, the future, the present? So you need to have an awareness of this, and this is best achieved by doing lots of practice. Just practice with a partner, practice by using these videos so that you can hear a question and just respond appropriately and quickly. So lots and lots of practice is needed. Some key things to note. Questions in part 1 of the test are always going to be familiar and relatively easy questions. You need to be aware of the tense of the questions. Are they asking about past, present, future? It's okay to give some short answers with just a few words, but you must also give extended answers sometimes. Extended answers means 3 or 4 or more sentences. It means giving examples of things. And this is important. There are no right or wrong answers. You don't need to worry about what the examiner will think about you. And the only rule is that your answers must be relevant. So as long as you have understood the question and your answer is relevant, it's fine. In the real test, the examiner won't ask you a question if you have already answered it. So in this test, I may have asked you something that you had already answered, and of course that's because I can't hear you. In the real test, the examiner will adjust the questions or may skip a question if you have already answered. And this is an important thing to note. Please avoid saying or never say, as I told you before or as I said before, because the tone is completely wrong. It's actually quite rude, and it's like saying to the examiner, there's something wrong with you. You weren't listening to me, were you? And clearly that's not the tone you want to use with the examiner. So I hear it a lot with students, but please just don't use it. This first part of the speaking test should take 4 or 5 minutes. There were 4 very short questions at the start, and then there were 8 questions, and some of those you needed to extend. Now if you consider that the test is going to take about 4 minutes and you've got 8 questions, it's around 30 seconds each. So in that time, some of those questions are going to need extended answers. Okay, and that's it for this video. For more practice, for tips and help with IELTS, please check my blog ieltswithmelinda.com. And I wish you the very best for your upcoming test.